published 2 books. One was called Programming Collective Intelligence, which is about a lot of the machine learning algorithms that are used in many kinds of web applications. And about the same time, we published a book called Learning OpenCV, about how do you build machine learning applications for computer vision. OpenCV is an open source computer vision package. And what struck me was how similar the material in the 2 books was. So again, I just want to put on your radar that the techniques that you use for responding to the real world in things like computer vision are actually the same techniques that you use in responding to other kinds of internet data. So part of your toolkit needs to be, what is commonly called machine learning. It's not just for robotics. So back to my core definition of Web 2.0 that I've been evangelizing as a missionary, to use my mishearing of Naveed's introduction, is to urge you to realize that Web 2.0 is about finding the meaning in user-generated data and device-generated data and turning it into real-time user-facing services. Now recently we started calling it Web Squared because there's this whole interface between the web and the world. We thought, well, we got an extra W in there, let's call it Web Squared. I wrote a paper about this, which is up on the Web 2.0 Summit site, called Web Squared Web 2.0 5 years on. I would urge you to read it because it sums up my thinking in this area right now. Next story, and more of the same. You guys have probably heard some of the buzz about augmented reality. Wikitude is one of the first applications. It's an augmented reality travel guide. Does what appears to be image recognition. Some of these things are not really. I'll tell you a bit more how they work, but they're things that are reading QR codes and other codes that are embedded in the real world. But what the really cool, like wow stuff is when you point the camera at an object and you show additional information about it. A couple of other applications. A UK company called Crosshair has built something called Nearest Tube. They also have one in New York. I think they call it Nearest Subway. Nearest Tube is more euphonic. But what you do is you hold up your Android phone, you pan it around, and it says, oh, down that street, the nearest subway station is half a mile. Down that way, it's 3/4 of a mile. Ah, it's 2 blocks. You go down that street. And what's kind of cool about it is, first of all, it is that promise of augmented reality, superimposing information on the visual screen of the camera. But it's also a really important point here. It makes it look like the camera is recognizing the street, or the application is recognizing the street, but it isn't. It's a cheat. Because what it's doing is the camera knows where you are, or rather the phone knows where you are. There's a compass in there, so it knows what direction you're pointing the camera, and it has a lookup database, again, in the cloud. So it says, okay, in this direction, in this position, pointing down that direction, do a lookup. It's actually pretty trivial, but it's a clever way to bring that back to the user in a pretty whizzy, cool application. And of course, more and more data is becoming available to these augmented reality apps. Google Street View starting to appear, in Google Maps on the phone. There's a whole lot happening with Google Maps on the phone. But just want you to think cloud plus mobile is leading us in this direction of augmented reality. And if you want to get really like, whoa, about augmented reality, pay attention to some of the stuff on the cutting edge of science and engineering. There's a story in IEEE Spectrum recently. First, pixels displayed in a contact lens. Okay, it's only a couple of pixels, but hey, how long is it before it's not on the phone, it's a heads-up display in your eye? Or certainly, could be in glasses. There's a lot of interesting work going that way. We're headed towards a very, very interesting information future with mobile applications driven from the cloud. So next story, just a little bit further. I'm a recent grandfather. That's my daughter with my new grandson. In iPhoto 09, you guys, if you have iPhoto, also in other environments, I think Facebook is doing some of this, Picasa is doing some of this, image recognition. You train, so it recognizes my daughter, who's still working. I had to work to find a photo where it didn't recognize my grandson. And so it's saying, is this Huck? I'm training it. You think about that. Well, it's not too bad when you're trying to do image recognition against your personal photos. After all, you're shooting the same people all the time. After a while, you can train it to recognize them, and it gets reasonably good. But oh, it's much harder if I were just trying to point my camera at all of you guys out there in the audience. Or is it? You know, because if you think about this idea of cooperating databases again, you know, how does face recognition change if I have access to your social network data? If I have access to your location data? You know, like if, for example, we have in the registration database of this conference, your Facebook page, which probably has a picture of you on it, it's a pretty simple matching problem. All of a sudden I'm going, well, you know, who's registered for the conference? Your phones are probably even reporting in that you're in the room. You know, there's all kinds of things that are going to be possible in the future that make what look like a very hard image recognition problem into a much easier one. Back to this idea of cheats. That there's going to be a lot of interesting hacks and ways to do stuff that appears completely magical to the user. That's actually not very hard if you're clever about the data sources you use and, of course, that you have access to the important data sources. So, kind of going back to thinking about kids, I'm so amazed watching my new grandson how he's, you know, stuffing things in his mouth, he's tasting them, he's trying to touch them, see them. You know, he's trying to put together the context from all the different senses that he has. You know, it looks like this, smells like this, tastes like this is how big it is. And of course, that's how our applications are starting to work. We're starting to put together the context that, you know, that allows us to make sense of these different data streams. So, moving on. If we're building an internet operating system and it's made of these data subsystems, we have a profound question that is facing us, and one that I've worried about from the beginning of my missionary work on this subject. You know, again, I told you how it started with my work on open source software. And I've been really obsessed with the idea that the end result of this transition is a transition back to a monopoly world that looks a lot like the one that the Linux and open source crew was trying to break out of. Because each of these databases has the characteristic that it gets better the more people use it. You know, the more data you have, the better you get. At some point it becomes very hard for new entrants to get into the market. You know, so some people have the scale and the dollars to really break in, but startups, it's pretty tough. And that leads naturally to a kind of natural monopoly. And I worry a lot that we could end up with the kind of internet operating system that we had in the PC era, which was, you know, to use an analogy from Lord of the Rings, one ring to rule them all. You know, the idea is that a platform is something that one company uses to get everybody you know, working for them, as opposed to the platform being an enabler. You know, the big contrast between Linux as a platform or the internet as a platform and, say, Windows as a platform, the iPhone as a platform. And so we're starting to see the shape of this. So, you know, is the architecture like the internet is today, small pieces loosely joined, end to end, anybody can add something out of the edges, it all works because we play by the same rules, or is it a world in which some companies are uniquely advantaged? And, you know, I don't know how many of you have seen this screen, which you come across occasionally on Facebook, but it's a real sign of how the web is changing. You know, it's like here, you click on a link, and instead of the web taking you to the link, you know, Facebook says, whoa, you're leaving Facebook for the big, scary, you know, unreliable World Wide Web. You know, that's, you know, Facebook is doing a lot to be part of this internet operating system story, but they also have this part where they're saying, Facebook is the platform. What do you mean the internet is the platform? Facebook is the platform. And similarly, Apple, you know, clearly, you know, the iPhone is the platform. You know, I mean, they may use some internet services. You know, a really good example, everybody who does anything with music uses CDDB to look up track names and so on. But that's a minor part of their offering. In the end, they're saying, we are the platform. And clearly, if you're looking at Amazon, you're looking at Windows Azure, you're looking at Google App Engine. These are all not about the internet as a platform. It's about Amazon as the platform, about Microsoft as the platform, about Google as the platform. Great, they may be great services. In fact, they are great services. But don't mix them up with this idea of the internet itself as the platform. And